The Spanish-American War had already been raging when the famous Rough Riders were deployed to fight in May of 1898. The unit was bustling with eagerness to join the fight. With Theodore Roosevelt as its most prominent leader, the Rough Riders would soon go on to become one of the most famous military units in American history. The Spanish colony of Cuba had been desiring to break away from Spain since Mexico achieved its own independence in 1821. Like most former colonies, the Cubans felt misrepresented and limited in their economic and social conditions. Large-scale rebellions had begun as early as 1868, 30 years before the Spanish-American War, and unrest had been growing long before. The other Spanish territories of Puerto Rico and the Philippines felt similar sentiments to their European overlords. Discontentment and rebellions became more and more prominent. The U.S. was aware of the tensions taking place around it. These affairs were important to the nation, which was still relatively minor on the world power scale. The U.S. had over $50 million invested in Cuban sugar production, which is nearly $2 billion in today's money. They had been wanting to purchase the island in years past. According to the Monroe Doctrine, the U.S. was obliged to discourage European colonialism in the area and inclined to assist struggling neighbors. As Cubans continued to fight for independence, American war fervor was increasingly fueled by quote-unquote yellow journalism, which was a highly exaggerated and dramatized style of news report. It was basically like 19th century clickbait, but it drove the American people to anger with Spain. On February 15, 1898, the USS Maine, which was stationed in Havana Harbor, mysteriously exploded. Investigations revealed that the cause was most likely a mine, but with much thanks to the yellow journalism, most of America blamed and accused Spain. Congress began building up military strength, and on April 21st, recently elected President William McKinley blockaded Cuba. 4 days later, war was declared between the two nations. "Remember the Maine" would become a common American war cry. Interestingly, the U.S. had strong anti-imperialist sentiments and swore not to take control of Cuba should they win the war. After the war began, U.S. Pacific forces made the first moves, attacking Manila. On the home front, the American military gathered maps and intelligence, and the Marines captured Guantanamo Bay in June 1898. However, at the time, the U.S. and rebel forces only numbered about 76,000 total on the island, and they weren't even centered. Spanish and Loyalist numbers approached 200,000. Obviously, the U.S. forces were going to need reinforcements in order to proceed. In later June, additional forces, the Rough Riders included, landed at Daiquiri, joining a force of rebels. The Rough Riders had been mustered in May of 1898 by Colonel Leonard Wood, a former White House physician, and the legend himself, Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt, up to this point, had been serving the U.S. as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. In addition to forming the Rough Riders Cavalry Unit, known officially as the 1st United States Volunteer Cavalry, Roosevelt, who would later become President of the United States, had also strengthened the Navy before the war had begun. He would become the unit's colonel. The Rough Rider unit was composed of men with incredibly varied backgrounds. Most of them came from the western areas, but there were also East Coast actors, miners, athletes, cowboys, professors, preachers, and writers. There were men from every one of the then 45 states of America, and even some from different countries. The unit even included 60 Native Americans. As a cavalry unit, the men had to be skilled with a gun and on horseback. The uniform generally used by most Rough Riders consisted of a dark blue flannel button-down shirt, leggings, khaki trousers, a cartridge belt, white canvas suspenders, the iconic slouch hat, which was often pinned up on one side to allow the slewing of a rifle over the shoulder, and low-heel leather boots. They carried a haversack, canteen, bowie knife, and Krag Jorgensen M1-896 carbine rifle, in addition to the various revolvers they brought, which were not issued by the military. Additionally, Teddy Roosevelt made the blue and white polka dot handkerchief an unofficial symbol of the Rough Riders unit. The Rough Riders had to leave part of their unit and nearly all of their horses behind in Florida, so they fought on foot as infantry. Their first fight, the skirmish of La Cuisina, was a victory. The decisive moment of the war was the American capture of Santiago de Cuba, led by Major General William R. Shafter. Santiago de Cuba was the second biggest city on the island. In order to take the city, a series of outer hills, which made its defense, had to be taken. On July 1, 1898, American forces attacked. After a confused deployment, Roosevelt and the riders charged and famously captured Kettle Hill. The unit suffered heavy casualties but was victorious. This triumph would be a major factor in Roosevelt's presidential election in future years. Meanwhile, the San Juan Hill was still under attack by the 1st Division. But with the combined help of the all-black Buffalo Soldiers, another famous military unit, and the Rough Riders' assistance, the day was won. 205 Americans had fallen and died compared to 215 Spanish deaths. In 2001, over 100 years later, Teddy Roosevelt received the Medal of Honor for his bold leadership that day. 2 days after the attack, the Spanish fleet was defeated and Santiago de Cuba besieged. It surrendered on July 16th. This was effectively the end of the war. An armistice was signed and agreed on August 12th, and a treaty signed on December 10th, 1898. The U.S. and Roosevelt had proven themselves to be strong, defeating a European power, and gained control of Puerto Rico and Guam. The Philippines were purchased from Spain for $20 million, which is a whole nother story of the Spanish-American War, and Cuba was at last given autonomy. I hope you enjoyed learning about Teddy and the Rough Riders. Their story is just a part of the short but interesting Spanish-American War of 1898, and there is abundantly more to cover here, like the reconcentration and the battle for the Philippines. I would love to make a video on the entirety of the war. That being said, I am making history videos on all eras, from ancient times to the medieval age to modern day. Please feel free to comment a topic you would like to see me address. And if you have enjoyed, please leave a like and consider subscribing. It means a lot. Thanks for watching.